want to ask all of you a question, and you can feel free to open your Chumashim. This is a complete open book quiz. Did anything strike you as particularly odd during this morning's Torah reading? Go back, chapter 31, verse 1. Well, that is unusual. We don't always start at the beginning of a chapter. I'll grant you that. Page 552, for those of you who want to sort of peek, perhaps, though the answer to the question may not be in verse 1. Okay, so that is true. For those of you who sort of pay attention to the fact that we're normally doing the triennial, which usually means that in year 1 we do the first third of a parsha, in year 2 we do the middle third of the parsha, and in year 3 we do the third third of the parsha, with occasional tweaking so that we include things like Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances, or Shirat Aryam, the crossing of the sea, certain things that you don't want to miss. But otherwise it's first third, second third, third third. When you get to some of the really short parshiot at the end of Deuteronomy, you do all thirds because there's barely enough verses for 1 year, much less 3 years. Okay, so, but we started chapter 35, verse 1. Okay, so why? Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in that question because I want to finish this first question. Okay. It's a leap year. Okay, so yes, Jewish leap years, we know, add an extra month to our calendar, right? Which means that instead of having, and there are, just curious, anybody know how many Torah portions there are in the Torah? Close, 54. All right, now that means that in a normal year, and in a Hebrew year, I remind you, is 11 days shorter than a solar year, there are not 54 weeks. And especially when you encounter the fact that you have Chol HaMoed Sukkot and Chol HaMoed Pesach in any given year, which preempts the normal Torah reading cycle, and we actually read the last Parsha on Simchas Torah, so we don't need 54 most of the time, except in a leap year when we add an extra month or 4 Shabbatot. So Vayakhel and its friend next week, Pekudei, are normally double parshiot. And because the leap year cycle is irregular, wherein you have 7 leap years within a 19-year cycle, it's not like every 3 years you worry about it. So in order to calculate the triennial, you have to look at, okay, in year 1, is it a leap year or is it not a leap year? What about year 2? What about year 3? And then you have to take that entirety and parse it out so that in year 1 you're reading certain things, year 2 you're reading certain things, and year 3 you're reading certain things, allowing for leap years, not leap years, and similar kind of phenomena, so that over the course of 3 years you read all of the 2 parshiot. Also happens with Achrei Mot and Kedoshim and a couple other parshiot later in the Torah. So even though we're in the second third, we're reading the beginning. Last year and next year we'll finish the Parsha and probably read part of the beginning of the following one because it will be not a leap year. Okay, so Arnie, your question, well taken, but I'm going to repeat it at the risk of so Arnie's question is, Rabbi, this seems really redundant. After all, we got in Parshat Truma and Parshat Tetzaveh all of God's instructions to Moses about the construction of the tabernacle. And here we're getting the same list of materials and right with a few new things thrown in. So Arnie's question is, the rabbis tell us that every word of Torah has to have value and meaning. Redundancy seems to negate that. So I'll give you sort of a traditionalist answer, and then I'll give you a more modern biblical scholarship answer, and you can put one in one pocket and one in the other, and take out whichever appeals to you at any given moment. If, as you continue to read Parshat Vayakhel and Pekudei, you'll notice that there are certain phrases that recurs, right? At the beginning, Moshe says, Eile hadvarim asher tziva Adonai la'asotatam. These are the things that God commanded that you do. And as we go through this parasha and the next parasha, that formula recurs and recurs. And as they go through the construction, the actual implementation of all this, it's always kasher tziva Adonai, just as God had commanded. So our sages build a few midrashim, but part of the idea that they emphasize is the repetition is to show that the Israelites withheld their desire to create and innovate, that they did and followed exactly what God's instructions were, and that given that this came in the wake of the golden calf incident, it was very important to show that the people were now willing to listen to God, obey God, and do exactly what God wanted. So that's sort of traditionalist answer. Okay. Modern biblical scholarship would tell you that this was a style of storytelling in the ancient Near East, where you would tell something and then you would retell it again with variations. Right? Be happy, by the way, you don't have three versions of it. No, because storytelling usually is built on threes. All right? You have iteration, reiteration, and then transformation. Right? Think about every little story that you learned as a kid. You have Goldilocks and the, all right? How many mice run up the clock? Okay. You can fill in others. Okay? Not to talk, porkers in the synagogue, but there are three little pigs. Right? But how does each story go? Right? We'll stick with the pigs. The first one builds a straw house, and the wolf comes along and huffs and he puffs, and poof, gone. Right? And he runs to his brother pig, and and now he moves into the wood house. And the wolf comes along and he huffs and he puffs and blows it down. Right? That's the way storytelling traditionally works. Iteration, reiteration, and then the hop. When you get to the third one, that's when the change happens. The wolf can't blow down the brick house. The third bowl is just right. The third bed is just right for Goldilocks. Right? So it's a storytelling phenomenon. And in fact, here we're in some ways we're lucky because they kind of did the instructions and then the fulfillment of the instructions and sort of skip the middle part, the reiteration. Right? So that's kind of a more modern biblical literary style response. I thought I saw one other hand. Well, so if whoever it was that had their hand up remembers their question, we'll entertain it. Yeah. Correct, yes. There is, we sort of talked a little bit about this last night, the idea that we might think that given that this is a sacred project, certain other rules can go by the boards. And the Torah is sort of saying, no. The whole purpose of building the Mishkan is to remind you of the divine presence in your community. And when is God most present? And I say that not because I think God, checks out and goes off to Starbucks, but rather that we are checked out because during the rest of the week we're kind of busy with and focused on all sorts of things. But God is most present, most manifest when we create sacred time in which to encounter God. That's, I think, the balance that the Torah is trying to emphasize and create. Right? Remember the purpose for the sacred project, otherwise you've missed the point. Okay. Okay, one last question. Okay, so for the benefit of those who might not have heard that, I'm going to try to capture the tamtzit, the essence, which is that if you read the instructions, you can't build this. If you read what we read today, it emphasizes that Bezalel is infused with divine ability, and that it's necessary for him to use it in order to translate these instructions into an actual physical structure. And so Saul's thought was that Dafka, for as much as the Torah may emphasize that this was done as God commanded, the truth is that the instructions are a little fuzzy, and Bezalel has to fill in the gaps from his own understanding and his own inspiration and his own awareness of God and what would be appropriate as a house of God. The short answer is, yeah, that's taka true. It's clear that Bezalel has power and authority and control over how this is going to look. In fact, there's an incredible midrash where Moshe is giving some instructions, and Bezalel says, no, I think you mean, and Moshe says, it's as if you were hiding up there when God was talking to me, because you got the mental picture that I didn't. And that's used to explain the etymology of his name, Bitzalel, Bitzel El, in the shadow of God. So you were hiding in God's shadow while he was talking to me, and you got better, clearer understanding. Which, by the way, when you think about it, some people have natural aptitudes. So you can tell me how to build something from now till the cows come home. But you'd be much better off telling my friend Lauren. He's always had, and he got this from his father of blessed memory, he just tinkers. He tinkers, he builds stuff. That's just him. Right? You can tell me how to do it. I can look at the instructions. Won't help me all that much, but I read them. Right? So part of, I think, the messaging here is when you're blessed with skills, talents, innate abilities, you should bring them to the service of God. Okay, I think that's a good place for us to stop. Chaverim, let me invite you back into our Sidurim on page 184. We'll continue with Chatzi Kaddish.